Well, good morning, everyone. I am so very happy to be here in the riding of Windsor-Tecumseh, to be standing alongside, of course, Gary Kaschak, Linda McCurdy, and Manpreet Brar, three outstanding Ontario Liberal candidates who have been working so hard through so many weeks, so many months, knocking on the doors, having the conversations. Three individuals who are true leaders in each of their communities. All three will make extraordinary champions at Queen's Park. And that's exactly what Windsor and Essex needs at this moment in time. Now, as Gary mentioned just a moment ago, this is an interesting time in Ontario. You know, we are a strong and resilient people for sure. It's how Ontario has endured so many challenges throughout its entire history. But there's no doubt that over the past couple of years in particular, it's been difficult with COVID. And we know that many here in Windsor-Tecumseh, Windsor West, and in Essex, so many Ontarians, despite how hard they work, still need help. They're still struggling. And when I look at the way that the Ford Conservatives have been campaigning, look at their last budget, look at the words that Mr. Ford uses on the campaign trail, it is so clear that they don't believe Ontarians need help. They just want to kind of skate right past the past couple of years and pretend that COVID never happened. And I suspect that's because their friends, the richest of the rich in this province, are feeling just fine. But everyone else, all of you, the hardworking families of Windsor and Essex, hardworking families right across this province, women and men who have been on the front lines, who have borne the brunt of how difficult this has been these past couple of years, you do need help. You know you're not going to get that help from the Ford Conservatives, but you will from the new Ontario Liberal team with our plan, a plan that is fair and forward-looking and fully costed, a plan that will support you every single step of the way. Now, this morning, I want to talk for just a moment about the importance of building up an economy, making the right kind of investments that will help create jobs, good jobs, jobs that pay well, jobs that will have the benefits, the packages that people need in order to have that floor of support beneath them. So that when they show up, the way that families do in Windsor and Essex, the way that families do across Ontario, well, they'll be able to support themselves. They'll be able to have a quality of life that they deserve. Those are the kinds of investments and the kind of economic leadership that Ontario Liberals are determined to deliver. And what we've witnessed here over the last number of weeks in this particular part of our province, an incredible part of our province. And I think about the economy here in Windsor and Essex. I think about manufacturing and so much else. I know this is an incredibly important part of Ontario's economy, a real engine historically and today, and there is so much potential here, so much potential. But of course, I think everybody here read and learned with great disappointment the news that LG Chem would no longer be interested in investing in building a facility here. This part of our province losing out on a potential $2.5 billion investment that would have created up to 1,500 jobs, and why? How troubling was it to learn that because of the cuts and the chaos and the lack of capacity and the lack of leadership from Doug Ford, that LG Chem was not able to make this investment in Windsor, Essex, because they couldn't get the electricity supply that was required, the 15 megawatts of electricity supply that was required. Deeply disappointing. But just think about this for a moment. 4 years ago, when Doug Ford first became Premier of Ontario, he decided, for reasons that I'll never understand except for pure politics, that he needed to cancel nearly 800 energy contracts, energy-generating contracts across this province. 1/3 of those canceled contracts that Doug Ford got rid of, 1/3 of those were in southwestern Ontario. A number were here in this region. And at the time, Doug Ford and the rest of his team said to the people of Windsor, Essex, and the people of Ontario, we have all the electricity that we need. And now we stand here, as I am today, with Linda and Manpreet and Gary, and we are talking about the electricity and energy needs that you need to have in place, the supply that you need to have in place in this community, so that when potential investors are looking for places to invest, when they're looking for a place where they can create jobs and help build a strong and resilient economy and give the people of this community the jobs that they need access to, that they can actually go through with making the investments, because the ingredients of a successful business are there, which we know for sure includes an adequate energy supply. It is absolutely appalling It's one thing to say, as Doug Ford did 4 years ago, I'm going to put up a bunch of billboards. It's one thing to wait until right before an election starts and put out a press release claiming you're going to solve all the problems. But the fact of the matter is, he canceled those energy contracts, and then about 1 year later, in 2019, 3 years ago, Ontario's Independent Electricity Systems Operator, the ISO put out a report that in 2019 told the world, including Doug Ford, that there were grave concerns about electricity supply in this region, here in Windsor, Essex. 3 years later, we wake up and hear the news and see the headlines that LG Chem's not going to go forward with their investment. And then Doug Ford puts out a press release. Then he shows up and dishes out empty words, his specialty, empty words written for him by someone else. Instead of having a real plan, a plan to make the right kind of investments, to make sure that we have a clean, green, and strong energy supply for Windsor, Essex, and for the rest of Ontario. Now, an Ontario Liberal government, in addition to making sure that we build out that strong and resilient and clean and sustainable electricity system, an Ontario Liberal government would also ask ISO to do a real deep dive, a real investigation into how we could urgently move forward to make sure that Windsor, Essex, and the rest of Ontario has the electricity that it needs so we can together create the jobs that we need in our province, including right here in Windsor, Essex. But I'd also ask ISO, we'd ask ISO, to help us understand better what went wrong here. What went wrong? When a government has 3 years to try to fix a problem that they know is coming and fails to do the job, fails to show up, fails to have a real plan, we need answers. Ontario Liberals want to get those answers. Ontarians want those answers, and the hardworking families of Windsor and Essex deserve those answers. So we're going to get that deep dive done, and we're also going to figure out quickly, urgently, how we can build up the energy supply that we need. So in the future, and not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, in the immediate and urgent future, we can lure the investment to Windsor and Essex. We can make sure that the jobs are created here and across Ontario so that our families, the families that we are so honored to try and represent, will be able to support themselves, build up an economy. Together we create that prosperity. And then when you look at the rest of the Ontario Liberal plan, it's prosperity that we will broadly share and share together. Thank you so very much. I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, so we have media on site and we have media on the line. We'll start with media on site. If you could just line up behind the microphone so folks on the Zoom can hear you.
Stephen.
Morning.
We know cost of living is a main concern for voters in this election, and we've heard a lot about gas prices and housing, but we haven't heard as much about food prices. Your platform talks about legislating fair and open negotiations between retailers and suppliers to drive down food prices long term. How will that work exactly?
Yeah, so first of all, talking about food, you know, you've probably heard me say this before. Every Saturday morning, I'm the person in our household who goes out to the grocery store in my home community. Did it yesterday morning, bright and early, just as the store opened up, right at 7 a.m. So like so many other Ontario families, I have seen firsthand how the cost of food has skyrocketed upwards, how there are wild swings back and forth, week to week, month to month in food prices, generally speaking, which make it so much more difficult for Ontario households to be able to budget and to be able to support themselves. So number one, in order to bring down the cost of food, we've made a commitment to take the provincial HST off every single prepared food under $20. So you go to your grocery store on the way home, maybe you pick up a rotisserie chicken or a side salad, as many families often do, bring it home for dinner. Every single time that it's under $20, our plan will save you 8%. Same thing at a bakery, same thing at a coffee truck, same thing at any particular place you might go to. Anywhere in this province, 8% off any prepared food under $20. Secondly, we know that some of the biggest and most profitable chains, conglomerates, have done extraordinarily well in the food and grocery business, have done extraordinarily well. Record profits that we've seen. But we also know that local suppliers, farmers, smaller suppliers, small and medium-sized businesses across this province in that food supply chain have had a great deal of difficulty dealing with these massive conglomerates. So we want to make sure that we put forward a very strong plan so that the discussions and the negotiations back and forth are fair, so that our local Ontario-based food suppliers can actually have a real shot at not only selling what they produce, but getting it done in a fair way we believe over time, but I want to move urgently on this, we believe over time that will help drive down the cost of food and create more fairness, in particular in the system, more fairness, but in particular for Ontario-based food suppliers, including our farming and agriculture community.
And your platform has said that the Liberals would make Ontario's food supply chain more resilient by reviewing potential restrictions on foreign ownership of farmland. How much of an issue is that currently, and how does it contribute to an insecure food supply chain?
Yeah, so I've actually heard about this quite a bit from those that I've had the chance to meet with over the past couple of years in our farming, I'll say in our agri-food community, if I can put it that way. In many parts of the province, grave concern about some extraordinarily rich farmland that we have in this province that has been sold, and others from other parts of the world looking to come in to access that land. I believe that we should have learned during this pandemic, that creating resilience in Ontario, part of that is making sure that domestically we have all of our supply chains being as strong as possible. None of us wants to go through another pandemic, of course, or any other kind of crisis, but we know it's inevitable that at some point in the future we will face new challenges. And we want to make sure that every aspect of Ontario's economy and every aspect or ingredient that's required to create a strong quality of life can be done so in the most resilient way possible. And there are few things that are more fundamental than food supply. So I've heard about it very clearly. It's something that we want to take a close look at and make sure that at all times we don't have to rely. We don't have to rely on the whims of others, that we actually have that resilience built right here at home.
Okay, we're going to move over to the line now. Just a reminder to reporters on the line to raise your hand using the Zoom function. Over to you, Andrea.
Okay, so we're going to open the line up now. I do see a few reporters on. Just a reminder to please raise your hand or write in the chat if you have a question. We'll just give it 10 seconds here for folks to raise their hands. Okay, we're going to Alan Hale at QP Today. Over to you, Alan.
Hi, Stephen.
Hey, Alan.
So you say you want to build up energy supply, but would that be green energy supply, or would you be looking at like more conventional stuff that could be built more quickly?
Yeah, so a couple of things to keep in mind. If you look at the Ontario Liberal Plan in our sustainability chapter, we talk about how we build up an electricity supply system using all of the tools that are available to us. Again, you heard me mention in my opening remarks the nearly 800 energy contracts that Doug Ford, for pure political reasons, decided to cancel shortly after becoming Premier of this province, claiming at that time that Ontario had all the electricity that it needed. Obviously not true, because of what we are hearing about LG Chem and how they won't make their investment, $2.5 billion investment for up to 1,500 jobs in Windsor, Essex, how they're not able to do that because they can't guarantee, or it cannot be guaranteed for them to get 15 megawatts of power. And you know, to me, that's actually appalling, especially since it was 3 full years ago that ISO flagged this as a grave concern, and Doug Ford did nothing. But when you look at our sustainability chapter, you see that we call for the creation of a clean, green, and sustainable energy supply system, or energy supply mix, that includes conservation first. We also know, by the way, the Ford Conservatives decided to underfund and cut in conservation programs. You got to bring those back. You have to look at renewables for sure, new technologies like storage. Yes, we know that a substantial part of Ontario's baseload power comes from nuclear, and that will continue. There's new technology with nuclear that should be looked at, and we also have neighbors like our friends in Quebec. When I was part of a cabinet, we had regular conversations with our cabinet colleagues in Quebec about the potential for more partnerships that way in terms of being able to access some of their hydroelectric power. So to me, there's no one single magic solution. What is required is, from the very beginning, understanding the urgency of this challenge and having a plan in place that you execute against. Let me also point out that in 2025, just a couple of years from now, one of Ontario's large-scale nuclear facilities in Pickering is going to be coming offline. That's not news. Everyone's known about it. Doug Ford and his energy ministers have known about it. Is there a plan that this current government has to deal with that? I suspect their plan is to actually ramp up using gas plants in order to produce the electricity that will be required. In fact, there are some who suggest that they're determined to see fossil fuel burning to produce electricity skyrocket by more than 400%. But we've known for years that Pickering was coming offline. We knew, Ontario Liberals knew, that those energy contracts should not have been canceled in 2018. So you need a real plan, but you also need to be competent, and Doug Ford isn't competent, doesn't have the plan. and he thinks that empty words and billboards will actually create economic opportunity and jobs. They won't. Only a real plan with real competence, real thoughtfulness, and a real responsible approach to getting it delivered will actually accomplish what's required.
I do wonder if a lot of green energy energy providers will be hesitant to come back to Ontario after the way the contracts were canceled. Are you prepared to like offer more incentives to lure people back?
Well, first of all, I think your question is right on the mark. I think there's quite a chill, not just by the way with renewables, but frankly, there's been quite a chill put into a lot of the aspects of the economy because when a premier gets elected and decides to show up and recklessly just cancel contracts, that sends a very clear message that that particular government, in this case Doug Ford's government, can't be trusted to honor contracts. That is bad for business. It doesn't matter what business you're in. It's a bad sign when people who want to make good faith investments in this province and come here to help, whether it's support electricity or other aspects of our economy to create jobs, when they don't think that you will honor the contracts, that's a really, really bad sign from an economic development standpoint. With respect to energy specifically, now look, I think we're now in a place where if I can call it the renewables industry or sector, I think is now in a place where it can compete. And I think it wants to compete. And I think there was a time when it viewed the Ontario market as a real leader, as a real place to be. And that's not the case because of Doug Ford's recklessness in this regard. So again, I want to work with ISO. I want to know exactly what went wrong here, exactly how the Ford Conservatives dropped the ball. But most importantly, I want to make sure going forward that the future LG Chem opportunities are not lost simply because Doug Ford doesn't know how to deliver what needs to be delivered. So I think that there's a real opportunity here, and we need a supply mix on the energy side that is comprehensive. It is looking at multiple options, and we need to move on this urgently because, as I mentioned, Pickering is coming offline in just a couple of years.
Okay, we're going to toss it over to Wyatt Sharp from the Wyatt Sharp Show. Over to you.
Morning, Stephen. So
Morning, Wyatt.
Just reading over the press release, and apologies if you've already been asked this, but the press release says 2 weeks after being sworn in, Doug Ford canceled 750 new electrical generation projects, with 1/3 of them being in southwestern Ontario. To what extent, if an Ontario Liberal government is elected, would they restore those projects and even go beyond that to create new ones?
Well, so yeah, again, as I mentioned earlier, Wyatt, it's so important. This is why it's so important, like literally starting on day one, to have as one of the top priorities for the very first cabinet meeting of a new Ontario Liberal government. What are we going to do about energy generation in this province? Because as I said, with Pickering coming offline in 2025, at the same time as our plan on sustainability and fighting the climate crisis requiring dramatically more electrification, so Ontario's electricity needs are going up, and our capacity to meet those needs is dropping all at the same time. And there is no plan. Doug Ford has no plan except to let fossil fuel burning electricity generation skyrocket out of control by more than 400%. And that's all because he's doing it on the back of a napkin. So we would want to move forward, bring back and properly fund conservation programs. We'd want to make sure that renewables competing at market could actually get back into the market, energy storage. Yes, we know that we have a significant nuclear component to our electricity mix. That's something we've had for generations and will continue to have. And again, talking to some of our neighboring jurisdictions like Quebec about what other opportunities exist there. I didn't say this in my earlier answer, but I'll say it now. Our plan on sustainability also calls for phasing out using natural gas to produce electricity. But the only way we're able to do that is because we're prepared on day one to come up with a comprehensive plan and then act upon it in a competent way that will create a clean, green, and sustainable electricity system in Ontario.
And then just on a slightly different topic as it relates to where you're in today of Windsor, obviously the NDP seems fairly strong there. It seems one question in this election will ultimately be whether or not progressive voters decide to put their support behind the NDP or the Liberals. So I guess what's your message to one of those voters in, say, Windsor or Essex region, where it generally seems to be federally and provincially a close race between all of the three major parties?
Well, I appreciate that question. Look, it's been so crystal clear, whether standing here in Windsor-Tecumseh or where I was a little bit earlier this morning in Windsor West or when I've been to Essex, there is a very clear sense of momentum. that is coalescing around Ontario Liberal candidates, especially since the leaders' debate. And it's understandable why. The three candidates I'm standing with today are working so hard, and they are going to be extraordinary champions at Queen's Park. But it's also because we have a plan that is fair, fully costed, and forward-looking. It's a plan that's remained consistent from the very beginning. It's a plan that we are so proud of. And the common thread or theme of that entire plan is a clear recognition that Ontario families, including in Windsor and Essex, still need help. They need a government and a premier who's on their side. Not empty words, not rhetoric, not all that stuff that we get from the Ford Conservatives, and not, excuse me, in the Ontario NDP, a platform that's changed 7 or 8 times in the span of a month. When I think about the cuts and the chaos and the havoc that we've had from the last 4 years of Doug Ford, I think that people in this region and across this province know this is not the time to take a risk on another team, in this case the NDP, that has no plan, at least not a constant plan, not a plan you can rely upon. There's only one option. If you are a progressive and you want to stop Doug Ford, as progressives do, because you know he's going to hold us back and drag this province down, your option, your best option, your only option, is to support the new Ontario Liberal team so we can deliver on the plan that we have put together and we can make your life better.
Great. Okay, that was the last question on the line. Back to you, Stephen.
Yep, thanks so much, Andrea. Look, delighted to be here in the riding of Windsor-Tecumseh, standing with 3 phenomenal candidates, Manpreet Brar, Linda McCurdy, and Gary Kaschak, who are all, as I said, working so hard. We know as Ontario Liberals that you need help. We know that you need a government that has your back and is on your side. That's why we will move urgently. We'll help resolve the affordability crisis. We'll invest in creating jobs in the right way by making sure that this region has the electricity supply that's clean, green, and sustainable that you deserve to have. We're going to do all this starting on day one. We've had enough of the empty words and all of the rhetoric and the gimmicks from the Ford Conservatives, and we know that the NDP is a risk that makes no sense at this point in time. We're just going to keep working as hard as we possibly can because that's what the people of Windsor and Essex deserve, and that's what Ontario Liberals will deliver. Thanks so much for being here.